Hi, I'm Colin Dembovsky, a Cloud Solution Architect with 10th Magnitude, and welcome to this series of videos about accelerating DevSecOps with GitHub, Azure, and Azure DevOps. You can reach me on Twitter at Colin Dembovsky, and my blog is colinsalmcorner.com. I'd like to start with an overview of DevOps, so let's jump right into it. So what is DevOps? For some, it's a job title. For others, it's about collaborating between development and operations. For some, it's all about automation. For others, it's faster and smaller releases. Now, the truth is that DevOps encompasses a lot of these aspects. But one of the best definitions that I've ever seen for DevOps comes from Donovan Brown, who's a PM at Microsoft. And a couple of years ago, he wrote a blog post where he coined this definition of DevOps. And it's become kind of a textbook definition for DevOps. In that blog post, Donovan goes over every word that he chose for this sentence, and he was very specific and deliberate about every word in this definition. So DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. If we're not getting code out the door into the hands of our users, then it's useless, irrespective of how pretty it may look. If we're not doing this continuously, then the value is limited to our customers. Markets are changing quickly, and we need to be able to respond quickly. DevOps is also not just about the products or the tools, but it's about the processes and especially the people. Culture is a huge aspect of successful DevOps. So here are some statistics from the State of DevOps report. Some of these are from the 2017, some from the 2018 report. But this is why DevOps matters. And it's important that we're able to define, to our business users especially, why DevOps matters. So with all the companies that were surveyed for this State of DevOps report, they found that there were 46 times more frequent code deployments for high-performing teams. So teams that were deploying once a year end up getting to deploy about once a week. So it's a massive improvement and allows a lot of innovation and a lot of value to be driven to users. There's also a faster lead time from commit to deploy. So think about how long it takes for you to get a changed line of code through dev, testing, QA, performance testing, and into production. As teams adopt some DevOps practices, they dramatically increase the speed that they can do that, which means better quality and faster recovery from issues. Now, just because teams are deploying faster doesn't mean that quality is suffering. In fact, there's a 5 times lower change failure rate for high-performing teams. Teams are also, of course, recovering a lot faster from downtime, nearly 100 times faster, which is, again, great value for business and for users. Automation is a huge part of DevOps, being able to remove manual tasks so that there is no fat fingering and no overwritten web config files becomes hugely valuable to the business, as well as being able to repeat processes and change the focus of developers and operations personnel from menial tasks to value add and innovative tasks. You can see that on this slide here, showing how much time teams are spending on new work versus unplanned and rework versus remediating security issues and so on. And the point is that high-performing teams that adopt DevOps practices are a lot more innovative. They have a lot more time to innovate than low-performing teams or teams that don't adopt DevOps. This is a slide from Microsoft, from Sam Guggenheimer, and this spells out some DevOps habits and practices. I've spoken about the flow of customer value, and some of the practices that aid that are automated testing, continuous integration and continuous deployment, and release management. There's a huge cultural component with team autonomy and enterprise alignment. Enterprise alignment is like a large tanker. That tanker may take a long time to turn, but you can get everyone facing in the right direction. Team autonomy is like having 600 rowboats. Each of those boats is very nimble and agile and can turn very quickly, but it's a different challenge to get all 600 pointing in the same direction. And so teams that are able to balance enterprise alignment and team autonomy are going to be successful teams. And some of the practices there are scaling agile, self-managing teams, and feature crews. Backlogs refined with learning is an important practice. Being able to monitor not only performance, but business telemetry, being able to test in production via canary testing or A/B testing, gathering stakeholder feedback. These are important practices that teams need to leverage in order to refine their backlog with learning rather than just guessing. And that goes hand in hand with evidence gathered in production. Being able to monitor all that telemetry and use feature flags, perform experiments, and then groom the backlog according to those experiments is again important for teams to be able to innovate rapidly and make sure they're delivering the right things. Managing technical debt is something that a lot of teams struggle with. And here some practices are peer code reviews and automated testing, agile documentation, enterprise package management. These all help teams to manage technical debt. And teams want to be able to focus on and pay down that debt so that they can innovate faster in the future. Having a production-first mindset is critical. Being able to monitor your applications deeply, understand exactly what's going on with them. Having practices such as infrastructure as code to be able to spin up environments on demand for dev and test, and for rolling out configuration changes across multiple environments. Continuous delivery and release management are some of the other practices that help teams foster a production-first mindset. And finally, looking at infrastructure as a flexible resource. This is where cloud becomes so important. Teams are able to spin up environments on demand and are able to scale environments up and down as the need for their services grows and ebbs and flows during different market conditions, different times of year, and so on. And some of the practices here include containers and microservices, as well as that automatic scaling capability that you get in the cloud. The second topic I want to cover is why GitHub. Open source software fundamentally shifts the way software is developed. There was a study done recently that showed that about 99% of all enterprise applications have some form of open source software. I always say, even if you start a file new project and do a .NET Core project, well, .NET Core, the entire framework is open source. And so it's very difficult to find an application nowadays that doesn't have some form of open source technology within that. Even if you start a new project within an enterprise, about 90% of new code bases start with open source. So open source is changing the way that the world delivers software, but we want to be able to do software responsibly and securely and be able to leverage open source in a safe manner. So Microsoft purchased GitHub a few months ago for $7.5 billion. Microsoft is investing in this platform. This slide is actually a little bit outdated. It says 40 million users. It's closer to 45 million users. It's over 100 million repos. About 30 million of those are open source. And so when you're tapping into open source on GitHub, you're tapping into 40 to 45 million other developers. And this allows such rapid innovation. And we want to be able to tap into that as enterprises. If we consider how security works, how it's happened traditionally in siloed security, typically we'll see things like testing just before deployment, where the security team is involved late in the development lifecycle, right before releases, where either they're blocking releases or having to deploy releases that have vulnerabilities because there's no time to fix them. There's a separate security expertise. There's separate teams that are dealing with security. And this can make security a very siloed practice within teams. And finally, traditional security is very manual. The security testing is ad hoc and manual. As DevSecOps starts to grow and gain popularity in the industry, we're seeing some transformation in the security practices of a lot of organizations. Testing is happening earlier in the cycle. It's shifting left. happening alongside with secure coding practices and quality gate checks and security vulnerability fixes. Security teams are also able to share their expertise more widely. They're pulling in developers, IT operations, and working with them to follow shared security guidelines in all their work. So responsibility for security is spread beyond just the security team. And finally, we're seeing a lot of tools that are being developed in this space to automate checking with CI/CD pipelines. And so we're automating those checks rather than doing them manually and baking them into day-to-day work. So there's 4 reasons why GitHub is important as we consider DevSecOps. Firstly, there's the Microsoft focus. As I've mentioned, Microsoft paid $7.5 billion for GitHub and really have a vision that all developers will be on GitHub at some point in the future. It's a huge platform, a very widely known platform, and being able to leverage that is something that Microsoft is focusing on. InnerSourcing is that practice of taking open source software development techniques and bringing them into an enterprise where you don't necessarily want to open source your repositories and your intellectual property, but you still want to take advantage of the open source style of creating software and sharing software. And so InnerSourcing is becoming increasingly important in enterprises. There's also advanced security, and this is where we want to be able to use open source, but do it securely and with confidence that we're not opening ourselves to vulnerabilities and hacks. So if we look at InnerSourcing, there's 3 key focuses here: increasing collaboration, empowering teams to collaborate on the same processes and practices as open source, even within the enterprise. Breaking down silos is about creating those cross-functional teams, sharing knowledge, improving code reuse, and securing workflows. And of course, increased developer satisfaction. As we empower developers to work on their interests and improve their skills through inner and open source practices, they're increasingly happy with their jobs, and there's less churn, there's less turnover, and this is good for our businesses. The software supply chain is difficult to secure, but with some of the tools that GitHub brings, like Dependabot, which secures usage of open source by scanning dependencies and notifying of vulnerabilities in those dependencies, we can ensure that any libraries that we're using are patched and don't have any exposed vulnerabilities. GitHub also acquired a company called Semel and have pattern-based security analysis through CodeQL. And we'll see a little bit of both of these in the demonstration as we get onto that. But GitHub has integrated both Dependabot and Semel into repositories in GitHub. And this can apply to both open source repos and enterprise code. And finally, those tools enable a global community for security professionals where they can share queries that detect vulnerabilities, where they can create vulnerability notices in a secure and safe space, and keep that security information up to date and integrate with the rest of the teams that are creating and producing software. You may have heard of GitHub Actions, and this talks to automating workflows and automating processes that go beyond just CI/CD, but also include CI/CD. GitHub Actions allows project events to trigger off automation workflows from CI/CD to other uses like labeling and auto-closing issues and so on. It's simple and easy to use with YAML configuration and a host of sample workflows and starter workflows for teams to get going quickly. And the global community is staggering, even though version 2 of Actions, which GA'd late last year, late 2019, so it's pretty young and pretty recent. There's already thousands of open source actions from Microsoft, GitHub, from Azure, from AWS, from Google, and these actions allow you to stitch together pretty complex workflows in a very simple and easy way. There's strong integration with Azure DevOps. So a lot of our customers are on Azure DevOps, and there's integration with boards. So you could have your source code in GitHub where you can take advantage of the advanced security features and dependency tracking and scanning with Dependabot and still integrate with work items on Azure boards. Not only can you integrate commits, but also pull requests, and you can do that using the simple AB hashtag notation. There's also integration with pipelines. So you can create pipelines in Azure Pipelines that trigger off commits to GitHub repos and can take advantage of full CI/CD capabilities in Azure Pipelines. There's also GitHub package management, and you can create packages in your GitHub repos from tasks inside of Azure Pipelines. So pretty good integration between GitHub and Azure DevOps.